Again, going back to 2008, Mr. Acosta, who limited the investigation and limited the search warrants and limited the parameters of the investigation.
The atmosphere inside the Senate Judiciary hearing room turned electric when Kash Patel took the lectern and addressed the lingering mysteries surrounding the Epstein files. His voice was steady, yet there was a hardness in his tone as he declared, "No credible information exists suggesting that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked underage girls to anyone besides himself." That declaration, delivered under the weight of intense scrutiny, seemed intended to draw a line beneath years of speculation, but it instead opened fresh controversy. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. From the moment Patel assumed the leadership of the FBI, anticipation mounted over how he would handle the Epstein dossier. A vast, tangled archive of court documents, financial data, personal contacts, flight logs, and digital records. For some, his arrival offered a chance at clarity. For others, it stoked suspicion that key revelations might remain buried. His hearings before both the Senate and House have become defining moments in the battle over what the public truly deserves to know. During the Senate hearing, Patel faced pointed questioning from lawmakers such as Sen. John Kennedy, who demanded to know whether the FBI could ever prove that Epstein had trafficked young women to third parties. Patel responded that with the information currently in hand, there was simply no basis to bring such cases. Yet he also added a caveat. If credible evidence were to emerge, the Bureau would act. That stance appeared calculated, a refusal to concede more than what has been proved, but an opening to future shifts depending on what comes to light. Across from those exchanges, members of Congress pressed not just for answers about co-conspirators, but about the transparency of the files themselves. "Why don't you just release the entire file as you promised to do?" challenged Rep. Jamie Raskin. Tensions flared as Democrats accused Patel and the FBI of shielding material, protecting powerful interests, or conducting a cover-up. The director countered that all publicly releasable content had been disclosed, but that many records remained legally protected or redacted. In the House Judiciary Committee, the clash persisted. Patel's answers occasionally grew terse, and a few exchanges devolved into bitter sparring. Lawmakers called him evasive. He answered that he would not break the law out of curiosity. At one moment, a member accused the FBI director with a blunt charge, "You are hiding the Epstein files. You are part of the cover-up." Patel pushed back, insisting that what the Bureau had released was already more than anyone else. One of the most consequential assertions came when Patel denied the existence of any client list, an idea that has galvanized public imagination, conspiracy theorists, and institutions alike. According to a joint FBI Justice Department memo, investigators found no evidence that Epstein maintained a list of prominent individuals to whom he trafficked women or engaged in blackmail. That conclusion was echoed by Patel in his testimony. But critics seized upon what they saw as selective redaction, missing footage, notably a missing minute of surveillance video in Epstein's cell, and unfulfilled promises of full transparency. Some among his own political allies have grown frustrated, say observers, at what feels like gradual retreat from more sensational claims. The contours of this debate run deeper than headlines. The Epstein files as they exist are formidable. Over 300 gigabytes of digital content, court transcripts, banking records, logs from Epstein's infamous private plane, and correspondence connecting him to people across the social strata. Some of that material has been released in redacted form, some remain sealed by statute or by court rulings, and some may still lie untouched. The crux of Patel's argument is that while suspicion may swirl, the FBI must follow the rule of law, not the whims of curiosity or partisanship. Yet in July 2025, the FBI and Department of Justice issued a memo concluding not only that no client list was substantiated, but also that Epstein's death was a suicide, and that no credible evidence of blackmail or extortion targeting uncharged individuals had been found. The memo drew immediate backlash, not just from skeptics of the official narrative, but from some who had earlier promoted more speculative threads. Conservatives who once rallied around the idea of hidden names behind Epstein's web felt shortchanged. Progressive voices pressed that releasing the files would give survivors much-needed agency and accountability. Some have tried to read in Patel's posture signs of internal strain. Attorney General Pam Bondi, for example, reportedly clashed with Patel over how aggressively to push the release. and whether certain names should be scrubbed or redacted. Bondi at one point claimed that Trump's name appeared in the files, referencing the controversy over whether such a revelation should see daylight. Patel, however, insisted he had never spoken with Trump about the files, and that he was bound by rules governing classification and privacy. The friction within Trump's orbit has become more visible over time. Some of his allies show impatience, accusing Patel of having fallen in behind federal hesitations. Notably, Patel publicly denied plans to resign over the DOJ's conclusions about Epstein, even though some rumors had floated in conservative circles about a principled break. Putin-style conspiracy framing may appeal to parts of his base, but Patel has repeatedly pushed back on conspiracy theories, calling many of them not true. He says that as director, he must adhere to the standards of evidence and the limitations of law. In June 2025, an interview with Joe Rogan added nuance to Patel's public image. On that podcast, he claimed the Bureau had reviewed all information, reiterated that Epstein did in fact kill himself, and asked rhetorically whether a director would withhold evidence if it existed. That kind of rhetorical flourish is as much about framing as it is about transparency. His choice of forum, non-traditional, direct to listeners, underscored how much of the Epstein conversation now happens outside of traditional public hearings. Still, hearings on Capitol Hill remain decisive battlegrounds. In both Senate and House sessions, Patel's testimony has become ritualized. Moments of high drama, partisan crossfire, and theatrical intensity. In one Senate exchange, he referred to admitted prior statements, made in his pre-director era, about the government shielding documents, a shift that critics have flagged as inconsistency. In the House Judiciary hearing, the back and forth grew heated when members pressed whether Trump's name appeared in the files and whether Patel had suppressed that connection. He refused to grant a yes or no answer. Patel's strategy seems to balance a need for control with the pressures of disclosure. He has emphasized that many records remain bound by court orders, victim privacy rules, or federal statutes that limit what can be revealed. Yet he also repeatedly touts how much material the FBI has released, casting the remaining secrets as matters of legal necessity, not bureaucratic opacity. That narrative is essential for his defense of institutional integrity. Behind all this lies the voices of Epstein's survivors. For many, the file disclosures thus far are insufficient. They seek naming of accomplices, full disclosure, and accountability. Patel has fielded questions about when the next tranche will come, how victims will be treated in redactions, and whether the FBI ever considered proactive declassification. He has sometimes responded that victims' privacy drives much of the redaction process, but opponents argue that a bolder approach could satisfy both transparency and confidentiality. Meanwhile, external watchers, journalists, advocacy groups, civil society organizations monitor the disclosures that do occur. The House Oversight Committee, for instance, has begun receiving files from Epstein's estate, including a granular birthday book containing letters Epstein received on his 50th birthday. Chairmen assert these will be published, and some lawmakers openly assert that Trump's name appears multiple times. Patel and the FBI have neither confirmed nor denied those filings. To understand this moment is to see the friction between legal constraint and public demand. Patel's posture is that he is constrained by courts, statutes, and redaction obligations. His critics see more opportunity squandered, that the director is hiding behind process rather than aggressively lifting the veil. The tension is not just over Epstein, but about institutional trust, executive accountability, and whether the power of the deep state can survive daylight. Several matters remain unsettled. Will new evidence emerge leading to fresh prosecutions? Will the full names of persons implicated be disclosed, or will redaction dominate? Will political pressure eventually force broader unsealing? And will Patel endure sustained attacks from both sides, those who demand more, and those who caution that more disclosure might destabilize other ongoing investigations? One thing is clear. Kash Patel's handling of the Epstein files has become a defining test of his FBI leadership. Amid oversaturation of conspiracy theories and public distrust, he must walk a tightrope. Too much secrecy, and he's accused of cover-ups. Too much unnecessary exposure, and he violates legal protections or victim privacy. Whether he succeeds in preserving the Bureau's legitimacy or fractures it under this weight will shape not only how the Epstein story is remembered, but how the next generation views accountability and justice in America. The weight of the Epstein Files controversy does not just rest on Kash Patel's testimony or the headlines that follow each hearing. It stretches across the broader conversation about power, secrecy, and justice in America. The public's hunger for answers has transformed the saga into something greater than the sum of its parts. Every statement made by Patel, every press release from the FBI, and every leaked memo is consumed, dissected, and spun across networks and social platforms, creating a perpetual cycle where speculation fills the vacuum left by redacted pages and closed-door discussions. What makes Patel's role so pivotal is not merely his official capacity as FBI director, but the political and cultural climate in which he is operating. Unlike past moments of federal controversy, where the public might eventually grow fatigued, this story seems to endure with unyielding momentum. Epstein's wealth, his relationships with the elite, the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death, and the sheer scale of unanswered questions have combined to keep the case alive in the public imagination. Patel, whether by choice or circumstance, has become the face of the government's handling of it. That makes his every word subject to extraordinary pressure. It is striking to observe how Patel frames his arguments when pressed by lawmakers and media. Rather than leaning into the more sensational elements of the case, he repeatedly returns to the language of legality and process. He emphasizes statutory obligations, court orders, and the need to protect victims' privacy. This approach places him firmly in the tradition of cautious bureaucrats. But his style, direct, forceful, and sometimes combative, distinguishes him from predecessors who might have hidden behind dry statements. He often conveys not only the limits of the FBI's authority, but also his personal conviction that adhering to those limits is essential to maintaining the rule of law. Still, beneath that exterior, the fissures are apparent. Patel must be acutely aware of the political forces swirling around him. On one side are legislators who want total disclosure regardless of the consequences. On another are figures within the intelligence and legal community who urge restraint, fearing that unsealing too much might compromise not only individual privacy, but also ongoing operations and foreign relations. There is also the added complication of Trump's enduring influence, given Patel's long association with him. Allegations that the files include Trump's name have placed Patel in a particularly uncomfortable position, and his refusal to directly confirm or deny has only fueled the perception that he is caught between loyalty to a former president and duty to the institution he now leads. The controversy around Patel has also reignited debates about the nature of conspiracy theories themselves. While he has dismissed many as not true, his critics argue that the lack of full disclosure feeds those very narratives. For conspiracy theories thrive on secrecy, and the Epstein case, with its missing surveillance footage, its redacted names, and its dramatic prison death, offers fertile ground for suspicion. Patel, by holding back information, risks reinforcing the belief that the government is actively hiding the truth. Conversely, by releasing everything, he risks damaging trust in the FBI if that information reveals institutional failures or the complicity of powerful figures. It is a paradox with no easy resolution. Outside the halls of Congress, Patel's handling of the Epstein files has become a touchstone for journalists and commentators. Cable news hosts dissect his hearings with fiery commentary, podcasts turn his words into hours of debate, and editorials frame him as either a courageous defender of institutional integrity or a gatekeeper shielding elites from accountability. In many ways, Patel has ceased to be just a man. He has become a symbol. For some, he represents the last line of defense against mob rule. For others, he embodies the entrenched power of federal institutions that protect the privileged. What is often lost in these debates is the human cost, the survivors of Epstein's crimes. Their stories are not hypothetical or political. They are deeply personal accounts of abuse, coercion, and trauma. For them, every redaction, every withheld document, feels like another act of silencing. Patel has acknowledged this dynamic in his testimony, citing victim privacy as one of the reasons for withholding names. Yet critics argue that true justice cannot exist without full recognition of the scope of Epstein's network. Survivors have consistently called for the naming of accomplices, for the recognition of systemic failure, and for institutional accountability. Their demands stand as a counterweight to Patel's insistence on process, and their voices remind the public that this saga is not only about files, but about human suffering. The broader implications of the Epstein files stretch into the realm of American governance. They raise questions about how much transparency is owed to the public, how privacy should be weighed against accountability, and how institutions handle cases that touch the highest echelons of power. Patel's choices today may set precedents for how future scandals involving elite figures are handled. If he errs too far on the side of secrecy, the precedent could entrench opacity. If he swings toward total transparency, it could permanently alter how intelligence and law enforcement agencies manage sensitive data. One of the more fascinating dimensions of Patel's role is how he handles the pressure from both allies and adversaries. Conservatives who once celebrated his loyalty during the Trump years now find themselves questioning whether he has abandoned them in favor of institutional caution. Progressives who once decried him as a partisan operative now portray him as an obstructionist. In this way, Patel has managed to alienate both sides of the aisle, though not completely. This strange position may be a liability politically, but it can also be seen as a testament to his insistence on charting a narrow course through turbulent waters. The reality Patel faces is that the Epstein case touches a raw nerve in the American psyche. It represents the intersection of wealth, power, exploitation, and secrecy. It is a case where the elite and the vulnerable collided in ways that remain unresolved. As such, any figure who becomes associated with the files inevitably inherits the burden of that unresolved conflict. Patel's tenure as FBI director may ultimately be remembered less for his other initiatives and more for how he navigated this single massive controversy. His appearances on platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast reveal another layer of his approach, bypassing traditional channels to speak directly to the public. In those settings, Patel comes across less as a bureaucrat and more as a man trying to manage an impossible situation. His rhetorical questions, asking whether anyone really believes he would protect criminals, are attempts to connect emotionally with listeners. Yet even in these informal venues, he maintains the same refusal to release specifics, underscoring how tightly he clings to the boundaries he has set. The controversies surrounding missing surveillance footage and lost minutes from Epstein's final hours highlight another challenge Patel must confront: the perception of incompetence within the system he leads. Even if Patel himself had no role in those failures, as FBI director, he is nonetheless held responsible for addressing them. Each gap in the record becomes an opportunity for critics to suggest cover-up, incompetence, or both. Patel's denials that there is more to the story are met with skepticism because the very existence of gaps in evidence makes skepticism almost inevitable. The internal conflicts between Patel and figures like Attorney General Bondi showcase the deep divisions within the administration over how to manage the files. Bondi's alleged anger about Trump's name in the files, and Patel's insistence on remaining within legal boundaries, reveal how the case strains even the closest political allies. These internal fissures show that the Epstein files are not only a national controversy, but a destabilizing force within the highest circles of power. Such fractures can ripple outward, shaping alliances, undermining strategies, and even altering the trajectory of political careers. The FBI's eventual conclusion that Epstein acted alone in trafficking girls and maintained no blackmail scheme was met with almost universal skepticism. It is not that people necessarily believe in any one alternative theory, it is that the official story feels incomplete. The problem Patel faces is that once public trust is eroded, no amount of official reassurance can restore it. In fact, every attempt to assert certainty may be interpreted as further evidence of deceit. This dynamic puts Patel in an unenviable position. The more he insists that the Bureau has no more to reveal, the more some members of the public are convinced that secrets remain. There is also the international dimension of the Epstein files to consider. Epstein's connections spanned borders, involving figures from Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. The handling of these files thus has implications for diplomacy. Patel must weigh how much disclosure could affect relationships with foreign governments, intelligence agencies, and individuals with global influence. This adds another layer of complexity, one rarely discussed in public hearings but undoubtedly present in private deliberations. Each disclosure risks not only domestic fallout but international reverberations. The symbolism of Epstein's private plane, the Lolita Express, looms large in public imagination. Flight logs have already revealed some high-profile passengers, but redactions and omissions leave the public wondering who else was involved. Patel's refusal to release unredacted logs fuels suspicions, though his defenders argue that unverified names could unfairly implicate innocent individuals. The balance between protecting reputations and revealing truth is precarious, and Patel seems committed to erring on the side of protection, even at the cost of credibility. A deeper layer of this story is how it reflects on the concept of institutional memory. The Epstein files are not merely about events from a decade ago, they are about how institutions record, preserve, and manage information. Patel has inherited not only the files, but the cumulative history of how they were handled by predecessors. Every decision he makes is judged not only on its own merits, but in comparison to past failures. This continuity of institutional responsibility underscores how leaders often bear the consequences of choices they did not make. Another factor complicating Patel's position is the enduring fascination with the idea of a hidden list. The very absence of such a list in official records paradoxically strengthens belief in its existence. For conspiracy theorists, absence becomes evidence. The government must be hiding it because it is too explosive to release. Patel's insistence that no list exists cannot extinguish this belief. In fact, it may inflame it. This demonstrates the near impossibility of disproving a negative in a climate where mistrust is already entrenched. The political theater surrounding Patel's testimony reveals much about the state of American governance. Hearings that are ostensibly about oversight often become stages for partisan grandstanding. Lawmakers use their questioning not only to probe Patel, but to signal to their constituencies. Patel, aware of this dynamic, often responds in ways that appear rehearsed, designed to resist traps and avoid sound bites that could be weaponized. Yet his very restraint sometimes becomes the soundbite, painted as evasiveness. It is a game of optics as much as substance, and Patel plays it with the awareness that every answer will reverberate far beyond the committee room. The role of media cannot be overstated. Patel's words are not just recorded, they are reframed, spun, and amplified. Headlines reduce hours of testimony to a single phrase: no credible evidence, no client list, not true. These reductions strip nuance and feed the polarization of public perception. Patel may intend one thing in the careful phrasing of his statements, but once filtered through the machinery of media, his words often carry meanings he cannot control. This loss of control is one of the great challenges of leadership in the digital age. Public fascination with Epstein is unlikely to wane anytime soon. The files represent not only a crime, but an allegory. The abuse of power, the corruption of institutions, the vulnerability of the powerless. Patel's stewardship of the files thus becomes a case study in how a government manages the tension between myth and reality. No matter how meticulously he clings to legality, he cannot escape the cultural weight of the case. The Epstein saga is no longer just a legal matter. It is a societal drama, and Patel is one of its central characters. As time goes on, Patel's decisions will likely be judged not only by Congress or the media, but by historians. They will ask whether he acted with integrity, whether he balanced transparency and protection wisely, and whether he preserved or undermined public trust in the FBI. They will evaluate not only what he revealed, but what he withheld. In that sense, the Epstein files are not just about the past crimes of one man, they are about the future of institutional credibility. For now, Patel stands in a uniquely precarious position. Every move he makes invites backlash, and every word he utters becomes fodder for debate. Yet he persists, holding the line he has drawn, that the FBI has released what it can, that no credible evidence supports wilder claims, and that he will not bow to pressure from either side. Whether that persistence is remembered as steadfastness or obstinacy remains to be seen, but it ensures that Patel's name will be permanently entwined with the story of the Epstein files. And as hearings continue, as survivors push for more recognition, as politicians seek advantage, and as the public demands answers, Patel will remain at the center of a storm that shows no sign of calming. His challenge is not just to manage documents, but to navigate the treacherous waters of trust, suspicion, power, and accountability. The Epstein files are a mirror reflecting America's anxieties about corruption and justice. and Patel is the man holding that mirror up for all to see. The ongoing saga of Kash Patel and the Epstein files has also raised profound questions about the very concept of accountability in democratic societies. One of the most difficult realities that emerges from this controversy is the gap between what the public expects from its institutions and what those institutions are realistically capable of delivering. Citizens want full transparency, clear answers, and immediate accountability. But the machinery of law enforcement and intelligence operates within a framework of legal constraints, bureaucratic procedures, and diplomatic considerations. This tension has created a space in which Patel's every move is judged not by whether it conforms to the law, but by whether it satisfies a restless public imagination that has been conditioned to expect revelations of hidden corruption. The phenomenon of distrust itself has become an object of study in the wake of Patel's leadership. Sociologists and political analysts point out that the Epstein files function as a kind of Rorschach test for the American psyche. People see in them whatever confirms their pre-existing beliefs. For those who distrust elites, the files prove a vast cover-up of the rich and powerful. For those who distrust government, the FBI's handling of them confirms suspicions of a deep state operating outside public oversight. Patel, caught in the middle, is unable to deliver a narrative that satisfies either side. His insistence on evidence and process cannot compete with the allure of speculation, which thrives in the spaces left blank by redactions and withheld documents. This dynamic also sheds light on how trauma intersects with politics. Survivors of Epstein's abuse do not see the files in abstract or institutional terms. For them, the contents represent validation of their suffering, recognition of complicity, and the possibility of some measure of justice. Yet when their demands for disclosure collide with Patel's caution, the result can feel like re-traumatization, as though their stories are again being suppressed. The fact that Patel repeatedly cites victim privacy as a reason for withholding material complicates this dynamic further. Survivors may interpret such statements as protective, but they may also feel that their agency is being co-opted, that their voices are invoked as justification for silence. This paradox illustrates how complex the ethics of disclosure are in cases of systemic abuse. Another rarely discussed aspect of Patel's stewardship is the burden it places on the institution of the FBI itself. Agencies are designed to withstand scrutiny, but they are not immune to damage. Repeated accusations of cover-ups erode morale among agents, especially those who had no connection to Epstein's investigation, but must nonetheless contend with the fallout. Patel, as the director, has to manage not only the public perception of the Bureau, but also its internal cohesion. His insistence on discipline, his sharp rebuttals to accusations, and his emphasis on professionalism are aimed as much at sustaining his own workforce as they are at answering critics. In this sense, Patel is engaged in a dual performance, one outward-facing for the American people and one inward-facing for the institution he leads. The influence of international observers adds yet another dimension. Foreign governments, media outlets, and advocacy groups follow Patel's statements closely, using them to measure the credibility of U.S. institutions. In countries where skepticism of American power is already strong, the perception that the FBI is hiding the truth about Epstein feeds anti-American narratives. Conversely, allies who rely on U.S. intelligence cooperation may worry that an agency under constant suspicion at home could struggle to command trust abroad. Patel must therefore weigh not only domestic considerations but the global reputation of the FBI. Every assertion he makes about the files reverberates far beyond America's borders. Perhaps the most intriguing element of Patel's role is how it reveals the limits of leadership in the face of myth. No matter how carefully he crafts his responses, no matter how many documents are eventually released, there will always be those who believe the most explosive truths remain hidden. This persistence of myth is not unique to Epstein. It is a recurring feature of cases where secrecy, power, and tragedy intersect. Yet the intensity of the Epstein story, amplified by social media and the culture of viral narratives, has given Patel a unique challenge. He must attempt to assert rational authority in an environment where emotion and suspicion hold sway. The outcome of this struggle will say much about the resilience or fragility of truth in the modern age. Patel's stewardship of the Epstein files illustrates how justice in the 21st century is not only about the administration of law, but about the management of perception. Files, memos, hearings, and press conferences all contribute to a theater in which appearances are as consequential as realities. Patel may believe that he is defending institutional integrity by adhering to strict boundaries, but the public will judge him by the stories that persist in the cultural imagination. His legacy will not be determined solely by what the files contain, but by how convincingly he convinces people that nothing more is hidden. In that sense, the story of Kash Patel and the Epstein files is less about the past crimes of one man and more about the present struggle over who controls the narrative of power, secrecy, and truth in America. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on Kash Patel's insights regarding Epstein files revelations? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.